Okay. So can everybody see my screen now, which is, it should be the PowerPoint. To make sure I'm sharing the correct screen here. Oops, that may not be the PowerPoint. Okay. Okay. So this is just going to be a little overview of the credential, and then we will go through the policies and procedures, and I'm going to try and give you guys some guidelines and just some information on it. So we'll just start this way. And again, if you have questions, hit them in the chat box, and then we'll answer. So some of this information we went over in our last monthly webinar, but if you remember, a few months ago, we learned about the credential and the rollout from the state. We did have an internal work group that came in. We met and developed policies and procedures for the district that was sent to all you at high schools. Just as a reminder, we do have two lead people in the schools, and that's Scott Barr and Courtney Boyd. They both participated in the 4-day or 3-day training. Maybe it was 4 days or 2 days. I don't remember how many days it was anymore. But you certainly can feel free to reach out to them as well if you have any specific questions. So like we said before, each high school needs to fill out the required information. And like I said, I'll go through those policies and procedures here in a minute. I've asked that they be returned by May 25th. But I also know that there's a lot going on in the schools in terms of testing and everything else. So if you need extra time, that's fine. Just please let me know. Excuse me. I am going to need them, your school's policies and procedures, before the year ends. So I need it before you all close up for the year and head home for the summer. But if you need longer than May 25th, that's certainly fine. That's an internal timeline. Just shoot me an email and let me know, hey, we need a few more weeks with testing and everything. We're not going to be able to get to this. I totally understand that. But basically, in those policies and procedures, you're going to plan for what it will look like in your school. Keeping in mind, this is a process we can change as we move through it, as children come in or children are identified on the IEP, as taking the high school credential. If we have to make some adjustments, we certainly can. It's never set in stone, and we can always add and change as we needed to. So the other thing I've asked with the policies and procedures is that we certainly know there's going to be some anticipated and additional costs for this. Unfortunately, one of the questions that we have been asked is there any additional budget for this? And the answer to that is no. The state hasn't funded any extra money for this credential. I will tell you, I did ask if we as a choice district had to participate in this credential. So I took one for the team and was told, yes, we do. So we do have to offer this credential, and unfortunately there is no extra budget for it. We do have some supplemental funds that will be forthcoming. I'm just waiting for a little more guidance from the state on how I can allocate those funds. But the thought is that it's going to be based upon the number of high school students that were in your school as of the child count. It won't be a whole lot, but every bit does help. This money would have to be spent by the end of September. For schools that are transferring to a new authorizer, I am finding out about that since some of the money will be spent after July 1 when you're under a new authorizer. So I'm finding out about all that. So that information will be forthcoming once I get some further information from the State Department. One of the other things we talked about is if you have 8th grade students and you've done annual reviews and you do have students you think or that teams might recommend for this high school credential, let's have some conversation about those students, because the decision can start to be made at the end of the 8th grade year. Now that doesn't mean you can't make a decision later. You certainly can. But if we have students now, we want to know about them and let's talk about them. So if you've had annuals for those 8th grade students, make sure we're having conversation, and we would have to hold an amendment. Remember, this isn't on the slide, but this is for incoming freshmen only. It does not include students who are being retained or anything, so it's strictly for freshmen as of the 2018-19 school year. If we know our students are transferring to schools within our district and we it would be good to invite that high school coordinator to those meetings, just kind of as a heads up. But again, if you have students who are thinking, let's talk about it, let's have some conversation. This was a list that our internal work group came up with in terms of what might a student who would do the South Carolina employability credential look like as opposed to a traditional diploma track student. So I'm not going to read all of these to you. I will send this PowerPoint out. I will also post it on our Google Share Drive as well, so you can refer to it later. But the team really thought it might help to kind of start to lay out what might the student look like. The other thing is this is information. The State Department has put out a general PowerPoint. I've already posted that on our Special Ed Google site. There is a whole, on the list menu, you'll see the South Carolina Credential is now a menu option, and you can go in there and look. There's some forms that I've put in there. There's this PowerPoint from the state. But things just to consider is that this is only going to be applicable for students with IEPs. So this is not applicable to students on 504s or anything else. This is not a high school diploma. So, you know, that's been a little bit confusing, but this at all will not be considered a diploma. It is, in fact, a credential. It is, in my opinion, what's replacing, if you remember, there being an occupational diploma in many districts. So this is the state's way of beginning to replace that occupational diploma with a credential that perhaps employers in the future will recognize as a graduating credential for those students who can't get a traditional diploma. So about half of the districts within the state already award a comparable credential. Again, that would be that occupational diploma. We don't in our district. We just have the traditional diploma or that certificate of attendance that your schools create and award to students. So this would be something else. It is standardized, so the state recognized way to give students recognition and employers documentation of skills. So this is going to be the same in every district across the state. We all have to do it. Excuse me. How we go about it is a little bit different, but all the requirements are the same for every district. So this one here, this is the website, the southcarolinacredential.org. If you have not gone to that website, please do. There is tons of information. It gives the background of it as to why the state wanted to do this credential, the history, the regulations, the laws, all of that. There are planning documents, there's outreach tools, and there's some more that they're adding and uploading to it daily. Some video tutorials will be opened. And some open source education forum, not quite sure what that is, but that will be updated. So if you haven't gone to this, please do go look at it, check it out, you know, get in there and really see what this is about. So I'm going to stop sharing and answer any questions that have come on, but basically we're going to review those policies and procedures that we have. Like I said, all of the information can be found on our Google site. It's on the menu, South Carolina High School Credential. I put all of that information in there this morning. That's the link to our site. So see what's in there, and I will also post this webinar as well as anything else as we continue to move through this process. So I'm going to stop sharing for a second and see if there are any questions, and it looks like there's some. So one of the questions is, has there been discussion about clusters of charters coming together to agree who within the district could serve as the credential option high school? So Maureen, we haven't had those discussions. It's my understanding that every school that has high school has to offer this. That's certainly a question I could ask if we could do it as a partnership or clusters, but then you might run into the issue of transportation and how to get students from one building to another if the school doesn't offer transportation. So right now we're just looking at every school to have policies and procedures and what it might look like in their setting. Does that answer your question? If y'all have any questions about this at this point, go ahead and put them in the chat, and then we'll move forward with the actual policies and procedures. So I'll wait just a minute to see if any questions come up. Maureen, it could be open for discussion. I'd have to talk with the state and get approval for that before we move forward with anything. Okay, well again, as we move forward, if you all have any questions, please just put them in the chat box. So right now, let's look at the actual policies and procedures that we sent out. So this is what you got in an email, what's posted on the share drive. As you can see, the format is very similar to our special education policies and procedures. The state liked our format, so they adopted it for this. So I thought that was pretty exciting that they like what we do, so they're going to use it for everybody else. So really, this is self-explanatory, a lot of it. I'm not going to go through every piece of this, just the parts that you have to insert. But these first couple of pages, again, like I said, are just about the regulations, the laws, the legislation that was passed in terms of getting this high school credential moved along across the state. And the state, you know, like I said before, bottom line, wanted to have a uniform credential that every district offered. So if a child does move from district to district, this would still be an option for students as opposed to every district doing something different. We're still obligated to FAPE and IEP. So this is an IEP team decision. So the course requirements, we're only going to require what the state requires. So we are not asking for anything more than what the state has laid out in terms of course requirement. On the Google Share Drive, there is information about courses and what those courses should look like. There have been some questions about them, and as I move through and I get through the end, I'll put out some of these questions that were emailed to me and hopefully answer and then answer any more. But basically, students on the high school credential still have to earn 24 units. That hasn't changed. So they still have to have 4 units of English, 4 units of math, 2 units of science, and 2 units of social studies. In addition, there must be 4 units of employability education. That's kind of loosey-goosey on what that should look like. I think it's pretty open to what you all in your schools decide. Maybe it's a business class, maybe it's a resume class, maybe it's something like that. There also has to be 6 electives. And as you can see, one of those has to be PE. So they still have to meet the PE requirement and take the PE or health requirement and have 1 unit of that as well as 1 unit of technology. Now, it's my understanding that these students do not have to take EOCs in the English, math, social studies, and science in order to pass the classes. So that's the difference between the credential and, of course, your traditional diploma. In addition to those courses, there has to be 360 hours of documented work experience. So this could be paid or unpaid experience. This could be a small business you set up in the school. This could be an online business. This could be a paid employment where they're working, you know, on the weekends or things like that, that we can document their experience. The important thing about the work experience is that it can't take away from the core classes. And then in addition to all of that, we also have to keep a portfolio with some sort of presentation, including the IGP and a work readiness assessment, and we're asking that that be uploaded into Enrich as the students begin working on it. So when you're thinking of your courses, you can see here and in your procedures that this information here, those are the codes in PowerSchool. So the state has already set the codes for those courses specific to this credential. So they will be in PowerSchool, it's my understanding, at the start of the school year. I've already sent it as well to Dawn in our district to make sure that it is there. So if you have students taking this credential and on this track, those are the courses that they'll have to be coded in. So in this part, what we're asking is your timelines is really just list out what you predict when these courses might be offered and what grade the students might take them. So my thought is that your 9th and 10th grade year are really going to be your coursework. And then your 11th and 12th grade year, you're really going to start to hammer out some of those 360 hours of that work experience that's required. So the next thing, so let's talk about that, is the work-based training and learning. So in addition to completing all those coursework, they do have to complete those 360 hours. So like this says, it could be a work-based learning training, maybe school-based. It could be a partnership with Voc Rehab, DDSN, any one of those outside communities, anything where the students are hooked up and learning some job skills. It must be aligned with their interest and preference and post-secondary goals, so it goes right along with indicator 13. If it is paid employment, it must be at minimum wage or above, and of course follow the Federal Fair Labor Standard Act. So we can't have our students making less money. They have to make the same amount minimum wage as anybody else would. So in this section where it's asking for your work-based training experiences, we're not asking for specifically what are the children going to do. Like, you don't have to say, we'll go work at Bojangles. Okay, so just what are some ideas of how you might get this done? Will it be a school-based business? Will it be outreach with the community? So you can be somewhat general in this. You don't have to be very specific in terms of what companies or things like that. We just want to know kind of what your thoughts are going into this and what this may look like. As students are on this credential, or we start to do this, if we need to change that, we certainly can as you all start to get into this. The next section to me is pretty clear. It's just how are we going to monitor the students' progress? As you can see, I've added that, you know, in our district, I'll monitor it through our CGI. It will be added as an item for those students that it applies to submit some of the documentation so we can ensure that things are moving along. So in this section, really what you're just going to do is list how you're going to monitor that progress, just like you do with any progress monitoring. What are you going to do to ensure that the students are enrolled in the courses, they're getting their work-based experience? So that's not a specific tool. It's just how are you going to monitor that in your building? The next thing is about the course of study. Here they're not asking for the person, just the position. So who's going to be responsible for doing this stuff? Who's going to collect the data? Who's going to convene the IEP team meeting? Most of it is probably going to be your team lead. But for example, determine the course of study could be in conjunction with the guidance counselor, the team lead, the school leader, whatever. And then the timeline. So when are you thinking you might be doing that stuff? Progress monitoring, I assume the timeline is going to be ongoing or throughout the year. You could say something like that. And you just need to insert in this table the position in those timelines. Same thing with the portfolio. So who's going to determine the method of storage and who's going to ensure that as a student transfer, if a student transfers, that information goes with them. That's why we're asking it to be uploaded into Enrich. So when we do electronic transfers, that can be part of the files that will go along with the students. Now, I can't guarantee that every district will upload into Enrich, but at least our district will be doing that so we can send it if a student transfers to another school or another district within the state. The next piece in terms of the completion, again, who's going to be responsible and what's the timeline? The schema is found on the website. I will also download it and put it on our Google Drive as well. So that's just a form to continue along to make sure the student is doing what they're supposed to be doing and that we're meeting the requirements that we need to have for this credential. And that's it in terms of the policies and procedures. So it's somewhat general and vague, clear as mud, I'm sure. As you all start to do it, and if you want to send it and say, hey, what do you think about this, that's fine. At this point, again, I just need some thoughts on what you all are going to do or what you're thinking of doing for this. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen and put out some questions here that were sent to me, and then hopefully answer any questions. So one of the questions, and this is one of the questions this year that I got is already, so is there a state curriculum for the English and math courses, or can it be part of the general ed or self-contained, in the general ed setting? So here's the thing, if our students are in the general ed setting for those courses, they shouldn't be on this credential track. they should be getting on the track for taking a regular high school diploma. And that obviously is our goal. We obviously want all of our students to get a high school diploma, but if they're in a general ed course, then they wouldn't necessarily be a candidate for this credential. So I look at these classes as our older, some of our self-contained classes. So these would be classes specifically taught by special education teachers, perhaps, and that's where the students are receiving all of their content and who's providing the grade. The other question, so that goes along with another question I got, do they need to be independent section or can they be embedded in the traditional CP course? And again, I think we answered that if they're in the traditional CP course, then they should not be a high school credential candidate. They would be a general, a typical diploma candidate. That's definitely going to impact or could impact your caseload or your teacher load, especially if you only have one student potentially who is on this track. My recommendation is, as you all, if you have students who are going to be on this track or students transfer into the school that are on this track or you think you have a student, let's talk about what this is going to look like for this student. Again, this is going to be a work in progress and we're going to learn as we go. There's not a whole lot of guidance out there except what's on that website. There's not any templates or samples or anything because everybody is going through this initially right now across the state. One of the other questions was about workplace assessments. As you saw, one of the requirements was a workplace assessment. I don't think you have to create your own. We certainly can use the 11th grade WIN assessment as that does it, so you can use the results from that. For this credential, you also could use those results in your Indicator 13 information as an assessment as well. So I don't think we have to create or buy or develop a whole new workplace assessment. We can use what the state's currently using since we have access to it, and every student has to take it in 11th grade. Another question, excuse me, that I got was, do we need to identify a job coach that identifies partner employees and monitors student student performance? So you don't have to have a separate position for this. This would be, in my opinion, would be overseen by your team lead. You work in conjunction with your guidance counselors, things like that. But I wouldn't see that you would have to have an actual different person or an added position to make sure this credential is done. You will have to monitor the students while they're out there. So that could, maybe, community-based, things like that, but I wouldn't necessarily see it as an addition of a job coach. If you have one, that's great. This would be a great person to help with that. If you have a person in your building who does CATE, so CATE and this credential and transition really go hand in hand, so that might be a good person to start to partner with within your building and help think through this. And then of course the biggest question was the budget and is there any extra funding, and as I said, there's not any extra funding for this. This is something that we have to do as a public school district. I'm not anticipating that we're going to have many students on this course, on this track, given the population of students we typically serve in our schools, but that doesn't mean that we won't have a student transferring from a Greenville County or a Beaufort County or somewhere like that for a student who is on this credential. So again, really the point of these policies and procedures is just to come up with, for lack of better words, a draft of what it could potentially look like, knowing that it is probably going to change or be modified or, maybe completely change as we begin to have students in this credential. So hopefully that explained a little bit of this process and really what we're looking for in terms of these policies and procedures. If you have questions, I'll stay on here for a few more minutes to see if there's any other questions in returns of this. Okay, make sure you're clicking to everyone. You send them to everyone so everybody could see the questions as you're submitting them. Maureen, your question about the Carnegie unit courses, if you go on that website or even on our Google Drive and see that information about the courses, that will probably answer some of your questions. But again, it wouldn't be taught in the general ed setting because if they're in that setting, then they should be able to get a typical high school diploma. So I'm not seeing any more questions come in at this point. So what I'll do, like I said, is I will send this out to all of the school-based coordinators. I'll post it on our Google Drive. I'll email everybody and send the links again. And if you have questions as you're doing it, please feel free to reach out and ask. You know, again, this is just kind of what we think we're going to do. Okay, so I'm not seeing any more questions, so I'm going to go ahead and end this meeting. And again, if you have questions, please reach out. And hope you all, I know testing starts tomorrow, so
Scott Barr
has left the meeting.
Well.
Becky
has left the meeting.